You're watching The Conservative Talks, brought to you by the ECR Party, your weekly Q&A show on the deeper themes driving the European news cycle. I'm your host, Jorge Gonzalez Galarza. Every week, an expert roster of authors, lawmakers, and newsmakers will join me to unpack the events rocking the European Union's foundations in a short, digestible format from a conservative and Euro-realist angle. Welcome to another episode in our series, and today we are so delighted to be talking to Anne-Élisabeth Moutet, who is joining us from Paris. A lot of our audience, I think, will be very fondly aware of Anne-Élisabeth's columns over the years for the Telegraph recently, but she's also really had a very distinguished reporting career through the decades from the United States, from the UK, and I mean, really, you're now a regular, Anne-Élisabeth, not just for the Telegraph, but across French and British TV media. And so we're so glad to be really visiting with you and discussing what looks like a very, very, first of all, the presidential races. I think what we'd love to be discussing with you today. We had a poll that was released by Le Parisien and L'Express, two big French papers, late last month, that show in the runoff, the second round, President Macron to be at about 52% and Marine Le Pen at 48%. And the fact that we're going to be in a reenactment of the 2017 runoff is almost a foregone conclusion, I believe, in your judgment as well at this point. So can you maybe begin with sort of how the country is, in the context of, pandemic, and also everything to do with the laïcité debate. There's just so much in this news cycle. So beginning with that, and then going into a larger discussion of France more generally.
Well, that's a tall order, and it goes in every direction. But I would like to say that I'm not entirely sure that this runoff, the second round of the election in 22, is going to be Marine Le Pen, Emmanuel Macron. He wants it to be Marine Le Pen because he believes that he can beat her. They had a shock at the Élysée when they saw how high she went, but at the end of the day, she still is not very credible. She does not have a reputation for competence. She is said to be very lazy, unlike her niece, Marion Maréchal, who is very hardworking. He always thought that was the best configuration for him. And what happens in France is the first election, you vote what you like, and you have an array of candidates, sometimes as much as 15, 16, from the extreme left to the extreme right. And then, there's only two, there could be three in something configuration, but there really should be sort of a strange configuration of none of the candidates getting enough votes. Really, the point is that the second round is when you essentially decide, it would be worse with the other one more than, oh, I love him and I'm going to vote for him or her. But in this instance, it is entirely possible that there will be spoiler candidates on the right against Marine Le Pen, in which case, if the vote is split between her and, say, for instance, someone like Éric Zemmour, the right-wing journalist, in that case, there could be a candidate of another stripe. And one of the candidates, even though she's only polling 6% in the first round in polls, is the unloved Paris mayor Anne Hidalgo, who is responsible for a huge debt and essentially fostering extreme green policies to keep a coalition with the Greens alive. And that results in some of the ugliest urban furniture you've seen in the universe, possibly the next galaxy as well. But she's a machine politician. She's a pro. She knows her business. And if she is a socialist candidate against Macron, it's going to be very interesting to see how that goes. There's the possibility, so far I don't believe it, that there will be a candidate on the right that is more convincing against Macron. But everyone is talking about Xavier Bertrand, who was the Minister for Social Affairs in the Sarkozy government, who is not an énarque, a graduate of this elite school that the French increasingly reject because they have such a formulaic answer to everything. He's not a technocrat, he's an insurance broker, and he looks like a sensible person. And recently he's been saying that he needed a coalition of the willing, and that would include two socialists, one being Emmanuel Valls, the anti-Islamist hardline former premier, and the other one would be Arnaud Montebourg, who's a gadfly, and who's a dangerous gadfly. And you start thinking, you know, when does somebody teach the democratic parties of the right of the spectrum in France that their electorate do not want to vote for somebody who says that they're, you know, they like things on the left as well? Macron won because he was such a novelty. He was 25 years younger than everybody else. He spoke very well. He annoyed so much. The idea of Macron annoyed so much everybody running against him in 2017 that essentially he got the populist vote on a misunderstanding. And the misunderstanding was this guy, what part of the misunderstanding was accurate? He really is going to punch them in the nose. Fantastic, you know, all the incumbents were kicked out, and people like that. But they also thought that he was a disruptor, and he ends up to be one of those technocrats like we've had in France for, you know, decades, people like Giscard d'Estaing and more of those. So in the end, his solutions are everybody else's solution within the technosphere. But his line was en même temps, you know, you can do this and you can do that. I'm neither left nor right. Having thought, you know, about this for a bit, I've decided that it is actually a massive mistake, and that if you essentially deconstruct, and I use the word advisedly, if you deconstruct what structures politics and what links today's politics with a history of thought and of philosophy, then you really should not start saying airily, I can cherry pick everywhere. If you cherry pick everywhere, you are the man of nowhere. And that's exactly what he was. And that's exactly how he's being perceived. And if Xavier Bertrand feels that he's going to need the center-right electorate, and he's going to attract them with a few socialists, a sprinkling of socialists, there have been memes being sort of shared all across the French internet saying, you know, this is what he wants. And yes, it's the more hardliner within the center-right and right-wing parties sort of deciding, wonderful, unforced error. We're going to sort of lay thick on Xavier Bertrand, but it's also something that he said. And therefore, there's also this feeling that there's not enough belief and too much calculation. And we are in an era, you know, for good or bad, we're at an era of belief, and people, there's a huge premium on sincerity. So if you do not have sincerity, if you've got people triangulating, this is like New Labour all over again, and people don't want it. So, you know, what this sort of strange, and I hope the listeners are not too terrified already, but anyway, France is a country that has a specialty of, you know, big beasts in the end winning the presidency, but a sprinkling of all sorts of middle parties, which so far have had an influence, but not too much, because we had no PR in the voting system. However, Macron, who is really ready to do just about anything, has decided to introduce a dose of PR. I'm not sure whether he's going to do this, but essentially he inherited something that was really disruptive in French politics, and it was changing the length of the mandate, presidential mandate, from 7 years to 5 years, and making it coincide with the legislative mandate. And you might think, well, this is completely logical, but actually it's not so much in France, because what you have in the presidential system that we have, which is very different from the, say, the British parliamentary system, is that the system itself, it's a system in which the National Assembly, the parliament, is essentially a rubber stamping sort of room, a house in which there is no room for changes, for opposition, and for constructing different policies. It so happens that the French Senate is still a right-wing majority, and they stop things, but they don't have the same power to get bills into the system. And the result is no checks on the president. The French president on many things has got more powers than the American president. He can start a war. Anything military is his own domain, and he can't, you know, nothing happens. Most foreign policy is also something that you don't run through parliament. And in general, these are too many powers. And You need to have extremely sort of large feet to fit those boots. And since General de Gaulle, I don't think we've had anyone who had that. So it's a more difficult situation because people will pick a number of sort of people in the first round, and anything can happen. And in the end, there will be two. And then they will duke it out, and the result is entirely contingent in how they do it. But I can also see Marine Le Pen winning by accident, because there are so many people in France who will vote for her just because they're annoyed, and who think, actually, well, yes, she is incompetent. This is perfect. I don't want my fascists to be competent. And they will vote for her. And if they vote for her, people will wake up the following day saying, what? But she will be president. And that's possible because they can't stand the face of Macron.
Well, this is so comprehensive, and I think there's really, towards the end of your comprehensive there was a point that I think strikes a lot of our Anglo-speaking listeners, which is the idea that, yes, we do have this sort of system that endows the presidency with just tremendous powers. I think even more so, as you pointed out, than the United States' system does, and just the fact that all these laws are named after the minister that proposes them, and that they get to have this sort of act of showmanship, showing up at the National Assembly and presenting their bills, and in a way that really runs counter to the way that the Brits and the Americans and really most European countries do it. So, but there's so much to unpack in what you've just described.
Yeah, I would like to point out that, very often, not always, but very often, when a bill is carried by a minister, it means that if something really sort of doesn't work out in voting that bill, or the bill encounters a strong opposition in the streets or in the House, the president can detach himself from the minister, and in some instances, the minister is just fired. So it's not so much that he's giving them, a parcel of a part of power. It's much more that the system is designed like a bureaucracy with fail-safe, so that the top civil servant is protected. And It is also something that the French now realize more and more, and they don't like it.
Yeah. Well, how coincidental that a lot of the people who have risked their reputations pushing reforms and policies in the past 20 years in France, to reform social security, to reform pensions, to do all the hard structural reforms that it is argued France needs, have ended up, exiled in Canada, or having really difficult political careers to get yourself on the line, and having to defend the agenda of a government. But
yes and no. You're thinking of Alain Juppé. Alain Juppé went to Canada because Alain Juppé came at the time when French judges started going into how political parties were financed, and there was a great deal of leeway at the time, and there was a bill, and it took some time for the bill and the effects of the bill to be felt. And anyway, Alain Juppé was condemned to a year of ineligibility. He could not be in politics for a year, and this is how he found himself in Canada. It hasn't got so much to do with this, and it was something that he did when he was the first deputy mayor of Paris under Jacques Chirac, of blessed memory.
Right. Another big scandal of the Fifth Republic.
One of the many. It's not a big one. There are big ones. There are really big ones.
One of the big ones that we know of. But I wonder. There's so much in there, Anne-Élisabeth, and that is so fascinating. And really, this needs thorough unpacking. What you've just described, and for English-speaking audience. And I thought maybe a way to start is to pick on one of the major legislative programs that the government is currently pushing through around an issue that you and I have discussed in the past, this problem that very compellingly the government calls separatism, right? The term itself is very, it tells you a lot about kind of how the issue is being handled politically. So they're working through this bill. We saw Marine Le Pen debate with the French minister last week on national TV. And I think this is really one of the issues that when non-French listeners look at France, this is really an issue that they puzzle at. They just can't really, and there's so much, there's so much mischaracterizations through the media that are not really helping people understand what's going on, as you and I have discussed in the past. So How do you begin to assess what's going on in France with this whole issue of laïcité? And is President Macron really trying, as Christopher Caldwell wrote in the Journal recently, to seek an enlightened Islam? And what are some of the hurdles he's bumping against?
Well, talking about unpacking, that's a really complicated issue. I mean, first of all, a reminder on what laïcité is. Laïcité is something that's, first of all, unique to French history. We had an established monarchy, which was of divine right until 1789, actually until 1791. And the whole idea is that after you had the revolution, the abolition of the monarchy, and followed up by the Napoleon sort of enforcing and giving legal structure to what Republican France would be like under his imperialship. I'm not sure how you say this, but all of this led to the 19th century, in which you had a restoration, but that restoration was in fact not quite what people hope, because you can never go back in time completely. But what is certain is that the expression of the reaction, people who wanted to go back to what had been destroyed by force, were on the side of the Catholic Church. And as the century advanced, the Catholic Church religion had a political part to play. And you have to remember that in the Assemblée législative, in the États généraux, when they were first called in 1789, at the outset of the French Revolution, you had three estates. The third estate was the people, the first estate was the nobility, the second estate was the clergy. The clergy prays for you, and in a country which has a monarch anointed by holy oils by an archbishop, this is serious business. And all of this had to sort of find a shape again. The Third Republic, after the French defeat in the French-Prussian War, which was a real shock for the nation, for the intellectuals, for many things. And it ushered in the Third Republic, which was actually an era of great progress. It's sort of belated Victorianism, although that started under Louis-Philippe and Napoleon III. But anyway, that was an era of progress, of riches, of creativity, and there was this ideological sort of vanguard that really wanted to sort of establish the Republic as sort of completely safe from the monarchy, completely safe from the reaction. And it ends up in 1905 with a showdown in which there's a bill that says a complete separation of church and state, and that expels a number of religious orders who are seen essentially as agents of the Vatican. And all nations have a past, and they don't always remember it, but today's battles are really sort of, there's a palimpsest, and under this there is history. And if you look at the West of England and the role and the surprisingly good figures that the Liberal Democrats get in every election, it's because of the old Whigs. And so nobody remembers who the Whigs are, basically, but there's a history of how they still exist as a shadow in the English landscape. And in the French landscape, you've got that, just as you've got a Christian Democrat Party that never existed, but that still exists in the provinces in general elections in France, because that was never the case. We got de Gaulle soon enough, and that was the end of it. But still, so all of this, it's more interesting the more you look at it, and the more interesting it is. But this is the background, the historical background for laïcité. What does laïcité provide? And laïcité in our days are a bit different, but basically it provides for the neutrality of the public space. It's not anti-religious. It is, it's explicitly says that it protects all people to have private, they can follow the religion they want. They can be Jewish, Muslim, Baha'i, Catholic, Protestant. And remember that we treated our Protestants very badly. But all of this is private. It is not the business of the state. And so the idea that you have a contract with a religion that is new in the country, really, and you tell them that it's got to be, you have to abide by this. You make it explicit, which is very un-French. It would be something much more American, strangely enough. It looks a bit like an American contract, that bill, which means that it doesn't work in the French system. I've read bits of it, and I read the charter, the Muslim charter, and it is extremely well-intentioned. I think Macron and some of his advisors have got the point. I don't think it's just hunting for votes. I think they understand the danger there is of people creating islands of something foreign in France, with the idea of destroying France. And for some nations, Saudi Arabia doesn't much care about elections, but certainly Erdogan has been working on Turkish communities in France for decades, and they all vote for him. Which is very strange when you think that they live in our country and they speak French, and they are not the ones who do not do badly. Who do badly in France, but still they speak Turkish, and they are less integrated today than they were 20 years ago. And 20 years ago they were a bit less than they were before. So there's this kind of separation of tectonic plates with something in France that has become dangerous. Even if you don't talk about radical Islam and terrorism, it is something that doesn't belong to a nation that has a set of values that construct it philosophically, and so that's part of the law. The law itself has all sorts of details that I haven't got here, and I would have to translate on the fly. It possibly is another talk if we want to get closer to it, but it is very ham-fisted, and I don't think they've got it right. But that's very typical of Emmanuel Macron. He thinks that he knows everything. Nobody dares tell him something else, essentially because any French boss, any French boss is not contradicted in French culture, which explains so many things about things we don't do that well. So the whole notion of separatism is actually a good notion, but it's very easy to criticize, and it's extremely easy to whip up people in a frenzy saying, in effect, this is Islamophobia, this is fingering people, this is making Muslims targets. It's easy. It is not the case, but it's something that I'm not sure it was the right solution to do this. I think there's a historical tradition in accepting the law of the Republic that could have worked, and the one community that had this kind of contract with the French state was the Jewish community, which was emancipated by Napoleon. And the Comte de Clermont-Tonnerre at that time said, give everything to the Jews as individuals and nothing to them as a nation. But that's French. That's the way the French do. It's the same thing for the Breton. Breton kids who dared to speak Breton in French schools a century ago got punished. We are a country that unifies everything, and you have heritage, but it's like your religion. It is a private thing. It is not something that makes you a discrete entity within the nation. And in that respect, the Jews have something, I think, which dates back to the 2,000 years, and that says the law of the king is the law of the law of the king is the law of the Jews. And so there was no problem with this. And the discussions between Napoleon himself and Clermont-Tonnerre and some others and Jewish leaders for something that he called the Sanhedrin was something that went well, and the Jews were very happy. That was not a problem. But I think Macron tried to do this, but I'm not sure he did it very well. On the other hand, in the eyes of people like the New York Times and the Washington Post, and in the eyes of people who are very consciously trying to deconstruct the French nation, he could have done anything very, very well, and they still would not have accepted it. But it's easier to bring people over to the bad guys, to use a shorthand, if you are a bit ham-fisted in this. The Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin debate with Marine Le Pen was surrealistic because she ended up defending Islam when he said Islam is the problem, which in itself was fascinating, but he would like to run for president, probably not this time unless Macron really stumbles. He's too young, and she is looking at whatever electorate she can garner, and she certainly does not want to lose a few votes that might get her there. It's messy. Most politics are messy. If you look at politics somewhere else, they are incredibly messy, and that is specifically messy. I would add that because France has had terrorism for so long, we've had, of course, terrorism during the Algerian War, but we've had terrorism in the 70s, and that was Palestinians, that was Iranians. After the Ayatollah Khomeini went back, and France decided not to give Iran the means to build nuclear plants because they were afraid of what hands it would get, and that was something that the Shah had ordered. They started killing people and blowing up bombs in France for several years because they wanted the stuff. We had then we became the hinterland. We had Libyan terrorism, just as Britain had Libyan terrorism. And then we started having the hinterland of the bloody civil war in Algeria between 1992 and 2000, in which, people, there were bombs in the metro, there were a bomb in the crowded shop on Rue de Rennes. So we have investigative magistrates in France who are very, very expert on terrorism, who have been corresponding with their counterparts in Britain, in America, who are quoted in American books. And we're very aware, and all those, this is something that the president is made aware of. This is something that the préfets are made aware of. Mm-hmm. And therefore, you can't say that the French are working from a standpoint of ignorance. They know pretty well where the danger is. They've seen it with Charlie Hebdo. Charlie Hebdo was really a shock to the nation. And it's like many things in politics, even cultural wars of an entirely different stripe. The country is more polarized on this than it should be. But that's the nature of the animal. It's like everything else. C'est compliqué. It's complicated.
Well, this is another incredibly worthwhile, I think, expose, and I think a lot of people will really appreciate hearing. And interesting, Anne-Élisabeth, if we, as you and I think, discussed the issue of kind of regulating religion in the public square, if we could just peg your last remarks there, where you kind of walked through how that played out with the Jewish faith, which is this very, very long history in France, and how Napoleon first tried to sort of give it an official standing within the pantheon of cults within France, and kind of recognize it. One of the first nations certainly among the continental nations to do so. And if you begin from that analysis, and then and I believe this is, I think, partly Macron's pitch, is to export that same kind of model to seek a form of Islam that is in many ways is regulated in a way that it arrives at a contract where the cult is permitted to go on, but that there's obligations on both sides. So beginning with that, I think, totally changes the conversation. And there was so much that was very interesting in what you said. I believe perhaps for maybe just a parting question, as we're nearing the end of the time that we have, there really seems like there are so many unknown variables, as you were discussing towards the start in the 2022 race. We don't know who's going to be on the ballot. We don't know how the first round is going to play out, and who we're going to find ourselves with in that runoff. So what are the things that worry you? Say we're looking, in 10 years' time. What are some of the deeper underlying problems, fissures, fractures within French society that really do worry you beyond just the of Marine Le Pen and the Élysée? What are some of the things that you would really want to warn your non-French listeners that what you've seen in France, reporting on France, but that you may also think, again, as you and I have discussed, France gets so much bad press, particularly around the laïcité issues you and I have discussed. The overwhelming majority of that is unfair. It doesn't, get due credit.
It's an American battle. It's an American
Right.
sort of mind illness that is also falling in France, because they seek, they roam the earth seeking whom they may devour. They devour their own, they fire their own because somebody found something that they misheard and decide that person must be fired from the establishment where they work. And the bosses of the companies comply meekly. And that's the American way. There's nothing we can say about this except that it will probably get worse until it gets better. But it is terrifying. And I think we just, we came in the crossfire, and they want to find racists. We want racists. And so, look at the French. And of course, they're all sort of building a sort of phantasmagory of colonialism, which, of course, they will direct this at practically every colonial power except Turkey. which still was a colonial power that kept its colonies for the longest period of time, much longer than the British Empire or the French Empire or the Dutch Empire or the Italian Empire, the Italian Empire especially, or the Spanish and Portuguese empires. And the Turks colonized whole swathes of Europe and the Mediterranean basin, and they kept it for several centuries, half a millennium. But nobody talks about this one. But all the rest, they are absolutely sort of targeted on this. But that's not. I would say that's not the thing that worries me most specifically in France. I worry that France is, if we don't do something at the slow sort of erosion of the technocratic and bureaucratic capacity of our country, which used to produce good things, infrastructure, meritocracy, a number of good things. And but that has slowly is slowly aging and ossifying. And I worry that we're going to become Uruguay. When I say we're going to become Uruguay, I think of that wonderful article written by V.S. Naipaul in the 70s for the New York Review of Books, in which he went to Uruguay, that used to be one of the richest countries in the world in the 30s. And he visits it in the 70s, coming over from Argentina. And I really recommend everyone to read The Return of Eva Perón by also V.S. Naipaul. And he looks at Uruguay and he explains how the lack of reform, the incapacity of the government to battle entrenched interests and a number of cowardly decisions or short-sighted decisions, make a country that had both the riches, the capacity for the people to sort of produce riches, and the intellectual class, still made it into a third world country by the 70s. And I really worry, especially when I go in Southeast Asia, for instance, if I go to Japan or Korea or other places, and the atmosphere of can-do and of possibilities, the opening of possibilities, and the national cohesion. And I look at France that has this negative attitude to so many things, and a bureaucracy that essentially is all about delaying tactics in order never to be responsible for anything. I worry that that France will be Uruguay in 20 years' time.
This is so fascinating. In fact, this is really so fascinating, and hopefully this could even make for a really good title for this conversation. And we do hope to see you really keep explaining all that for a non-French speaking audience, because whenever I hear you talk, Anne-Élisabeth, on TV and particularly to Anglo-speaking audiences, the richness of what you try to explain about French life over the past 5 decades I take that as a testament of the misunderstanding that there exists. The fact that I think France is really very badly understood, I think, in a lot of corners of the Western world, and we need people who are able to explain it. So this was really delightful to be able to visit with you, and we have a very exciting race ahead of 2022. And again, thank you so much for your time this evening, and looking forward to speaking with you again on another occasion. That is all the time we have for this episode. If you like what you've watched, stay tuned for future episodes on YouTube and across the ECR Party's social media presence. Thank you.